Welcome, traveler of dreams. Tonight's Black Friday stories drift in like a cold draft you didn't notice. Before we get started, remember to like the video and subscribe so you won't miss future horror stories like these. Also, let me know where you are watching from, so go ahead and leave a comment. Let's begin. When the doors finally unlocked, the crowd surged inward with the force of a storm gust snapping through a broken window. I seriously considered turning around and scrapping the entire trip, but Marina clamped onto my arm and dragged me onward. Suddenly, I was part of this fast-moving current of bodies pushing toward different sections of the department store. She wanted gadgets, I needed clothes, so we split by the food court and planned to meet back in an hour. By the time I rode the escalator to the second floor where clothing was kept, the entire space had already dissolved into chaos. Racks were half stripped, hangers scattered across the tiles like sun-bleached debris, and shoppers moved with frantic, sharp focus. I hugged the walls as I made my way toward the outerwear section, careful to avoid the central aisles where people sprinted with piles of sweaters balanced against their chests. Near the back was a display of high-end jackets marked down 70%, and that's where everything spiraled. I saw her immediately. This woman in a crimson velour tracksuit with bleached curls, teased into a style that belonged in another decade. She held a beautiful leather coat, checking the price tag, while a younger woman in leggings hovered nearby with her hand already reaching for another version. There were only 3 of those particular jackets left, rich caramel leather with polished metal accents, and at least 7 more shoppers slowly circling the display like predators waiting for a weak spot. The woman in red must have sensed the competition because she scooped all 3 jackets to her chest in one greedy sweep. The leggings woman lunged forward and grabbed a sleeve, yanking hard enough to knock both of them off balance. What followed reminded me of an animal documentary spiraling into disaster. They were shrieking, not words, just raw sound, and the jackets stretched between them began splitting at the seams. Before I could fully process it, others dove in to grab the remaining pieces that had fallen. A man in a pressed business suit stomped on the older woman's hand to reach one of the jackets, releasing a sharp yelp that cut through the noise. Someone elbowed the younger woman's ribcage, doubling her over, but she didn't loosen her grip. 2 more people began tugging from different directions, turning the jacket into a twisted mess of leather. The security guard by the fitting rooms was pacing and muttering into his radio, but he didn't budge from his spot. The crowd was pulling in from every direction, drawn to the commotion, compressing tighter until I was wedged against a circular rack so firmly the bar jabbed into my hip. A teenage boy shoved past me using my shoulder as leverage, knocking me backward into a mannequin that toppled with a loud crash. The sound seemed to ignite the entire section. People started grabbing anything within reach. A woman carrying a church tote rammed another shopper into a mirror, so hard the surface cracked like a spiderweb. From somewhere deeper in the aisle came the piercing scream of a child, amplified by the echoing acoustics. Then I saw her, a woman maybe in her 70s, using a walker fitted with tennis balls. She was doing everything she could to escape the madness, edging along the wall toward the elevator. Her expression was dazed, as if she'd stepped into a battlefield instead of a mall sale. She nearly made it too. She was only a short distance from safety when a heavy man in a football jersey stumbled backward into her. She collapsed instantly. Her walker flew one direction, her purse in another. The small sound she made as she hit the ground was fragile and lost beneath the noise, but I heard it clearly. She reached out trying to find something to pull herself upright, but the shifting crowd swallowed her. People stepped over her, on her, around her, as if she were nothing more than another piece of fallen merchandise. I tried pushing toward her, truly tried, but the mass of bodies had taken on a life of its own. Any attempt to move forward carried me sideways instead. Someone's elbow smashed into my midsection, forcing me down for a moment, and by the time I could look again, all I saw were shoes, boots, and flashes of fabric on the floor. The jacket that had started the fight was now torn into strips clutched by different hands. A display table finally gave way with a sound like thunder, sweaters tumbling in a bright avalanche. People dove on top of them, crawling on their stomachs to snatch anything they could. The leggings woman was slumped on her knees with blood trickling from her nose, still holding a fragment of that doomed jacket. The red tracksuit lady had vanished completely. My survival instincts kicked in at last. I shoved through the perimeter of bodies using elbows, shoulders, whatever worked. Someone raked long acrylic nails across my forearm, leaving 3 burning lines when I accidentally blocked her view of a fallen designer bag. I didn't stop. I fixed my eyes on the glowing emergency exit sign over a door labeled staff only. I pushed through it and stumbled into a concrete stairwell that smelled like detergent and dust. My legs trembled so hard I had to sit on one of the steps. Through the door I could still hear the roar of chaos, muffled but relentless like a storm battering walls from the outside. My phone buzzed nonstop. Marina asking where I was and bragging about the deal she'd grabbed, clueless about the carnage happening yards away. I stayed in that stairwell for 20 minutes, listening to approaching sirens and rushed footsteps echoing through the floors below. Eventually, a security guard found me, his face aged by what he'd witnessed. He told me the police had cleared the floor and directed me toward the loading dock exit. As we descended past other stunned shoppers sitting on the steps, I noticed a woman still holding a cashmere scarf with the tag hanging off, unaware she was gripping it. Outside, ambulances painted the concrete with alternating red and blue flashes. I watched paramedics load someone onto a stretcher, a small frame beneath a silver blanket. I didn't know if it was the older woman, but the paramedics weren't moving with urgency, and dread twisted inside me. Marina eventually found me by the loading dock, irritated at first because I made her leave the electronics line before she could snag a discounted TV. That irritation vanished when she saw the gouges on my arm. We drove home in silence except for the news reports already calling it the worst Black Friday incident in the region. 7 injured, 1 in critical condition. Witnesses described it like a natural disaster, unstoppable, nobody to blame. One woman even declared it worth it because she managed to snag a gaming system for her grandson. The store reopened the next morning. The incident was a headline for 2 days before politics buried it. Months later, I returned only to exchange something Marina had ordered online. They had remodeled the apparel section, replaced the lighting, rearranged everything. But I still recognized the spot where the older woman fell, now covered by cheerful spring dresses. A manager approached me, said he recognized me somehow, and offered me a $50 gift card as if that could undo anything. I stopped going out for Black Friday after that. Even now, crowded stores make me scan exits and read the energy of the room. Sometimes I still hear that soft noise the older woman made, surprise mixed with hurt as she fell. It lingers longer than the chaos, longer than the shouting, longer than anything else that happened that day. Marina insists I'm exaggerating, saying it was a freak event, but she wasn't trapped in the middle of it. She didn't see how fast people abandon their humanity when desire outweighs empathy. The 3 scars on my arm faded into pale lines I blame on a cat so I don't have to explain the truth, that they came from strangers clawing their way to a designer item while a woman lay dying yards away. And no one paused, no one even hesitated. All because the sale only lasted while supplies did. Thanksgiving week always used to make me uneasy, and that year was no different. I worked for Northline Logistics, a freight company in the industrial strip outside Pine Harbor, and the long drives home were usually the only time I had to decompress. The roads were almost abandoned that evening except for the soft rumble of my old sedan and the occasional pair of headlights drifting by like ghosts. My plan was simple. Stop by a place called Deal Mart Warehouse to pick up a discounted gaming console for my cousin before the big holiday meal. I had ordered it online through a storefront called Market Direct, which promised an in-store pickup at a location I had never visited. It was already past 7 when I turned off the highway onto a narrow access road flanked by shuttered steel buildings. The GPS arrow blinked insistently, directing me toward a structure with faded blue panels and a sign so weather-beaten I couldn't read it until I parked directly beneath it. The lot was empty except for a semi-trailer idling near a loading ramp. The store entrance was strangely quiet for a place participating in a holiday sale. Still, Market Direct's confirmation email insisted this was the location, so I headed inside. The sliding doors opened sluggishly, dragging across the floor as they parted. Inside, fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead, casting a sterile light across metal shelves sparsely filled with off-brand electronics and clearance bins piled with broken packaging. A man in a gray jacket stood near a folding table, tapping on a handheld device. His face tightened when he looked up, as if he wasn't expecting anyone. I held out my confirmation code, and he briefly glanced at it before waving me toward the back of the warehouse without a word. Something felt off the moment I stepped deeper inside. The aisles were crooked, some shelves deliberately blocking sightlines, and half the signs were written on loose printer paper with misspelled product names. A faint chemical odor hung in the air. I reached the pickup counter, if you could call it that. It was just a plywood desk with a stack of cardboard boxes, none labeled. A woman wearing a baseball cap pulled low over her brow asked me for my order number, typing it into an ancient laptop with keys missing. Her expression didn't change when she told me my item was stored in the back. She gestured toward a door marked with a peeling employees only sticker. I waited and waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The warehouse remained nearly silent, except for the humming lights and occasional thud from somewhere deeper within the building. I approached the counter again to ask for an update, but the woman was gone. The chair behind the plywood desk sat empty. A draft pushed through the room, rustling loose receipts on the floor. The chemical smell grew stronger. I tried calling out, my voice echoing strangely through the cramped aisles. A metal clang reverberated from behind the employee door, followed by muffled footsteps. A man I hadn't seen before emerged, wiping his hands on a rag. His jacket had the same faded gray color as the first man's, but no logo or name tag. He said nothing. He didn't even hand me the console. Instead, he stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment before asking if I had come alone. The question hit with an odd weight. I forced a casual answer about my car being outside, and he nodded slowly, as if calculating something. He told me they were looking for the right box. When he went back through the door, something inside me told me to leave. I walked toward the entrance, but halfway down the aisle I noticed the sliding doors had closed again. They weren't transparent the way most automatic doors are. These were covered in black vinyl, making the outside invisible. As I got closer, I realized the doors weren't responding. I waved my hand. Nothing. I pressed on the seams. They didn't budge. There was no manual release. All that greeted me was the distorted reflection of the flickering lights. My heartbeat picked up, and I turned toward the loading dock area, thinking maybe I could exit through a side door. On the way, I passed rows of crates stacked with torn labels. Some were marked with shipping companies I recognized, others bore no branding at all. A cold draft seeped out from a cracked crate lid, carrying the same chemical scent I'd noticed before. A faint, rhythmic sound echoed from between the stacks, a dragging noise, slow and deliberate. I stepped back instinctively, bumping into a freestanding shelf that rattled loudly. That noise drew attention. I heard hurried steps approaching, so I slipped down a narrow lane between pallets and crouched. My phone buzzed with a notification from Market Direct asking me to confirm arrival, even though I'd been there for nearly half an hour. The buzzing footsteps grew louder, then paused. Someone was breathing nearby, steady and controlled, like they were listening for movement. The chemical scent thickened until my eyes watered. Eventually, the footsteps retreated. I took the chance to move again. I found the employee door slightly ajar now. Behind it was a corridor lined with electrical conduits and exposed insulation, dimly lit by a few ceiling fixtures that flickered more than they glowed. At the far end was a steel door propped open with a wooden wedge. Beyond that was another room, larger, colder, with several folding tables arranged in rows. On each table were stacks of electronics in various states of disassembly, circuit boards stripped of components, game console shells without internal hardware, scattered screws, cutters, bottles of industrial glue. The realization settled in slowly. Nothing in this warehouse was legitimate. Everything was either counterfeit, harvested for parts, or waiting to be modified. In the corner was a stack of small cardboard boxes matching the ones at the front desk, each labeled with fake shipping barcodes. I spotted one with my name misspelled. I moved toward it, thinking maybe I could grab it and run. But before I could reach it, a door slammed behind me. The wedge was gone. The steel door was now completely shut. The room suddenly felt colder. I scanned for another exit, but the only visible doorway led into a darker storage space where the lights didn't reach. I backed away slowly, hugging the wall, when a voice echoed from the corridor. "You're not supposed to be back here." The gray-jacketed man from earlier stepped inside, now blocking the only lit exit. His expression was flat, his posture squared in a way that made the room feel smaller. He asked again whether anyone was with me, his gaze locked onto mine. I muttered something about my family expecting me soon, how they knew my exact location because of phone tracking. His eyes tightened at that. He signaled toward the darker room behind me and said they had just found my console. Another voice called from deeper within the shadows, saying, "Bring him." That word, him, snapped something awake inside me. I lunged toward the folding tables, knocking over a stack of plastic shells. They fell loudly, scattering across the floor. In the moment of noise and confusion, I sprinted past the man, shoving my shoulder into his side. He staggered but didn't fall. I ran through the corridor, hearing multiple sets of footsteps closing in. My hand hit the employee door, and I dragged it open, nearly ripping it off its hinges. I ran past the plywood counter and through the aisles toward the sliding doors. They still wouldn't open. But the semi-trailer outside, the one idling when I first arrived, was now gone, leaving the loading ramp platform exposed. I sprinted through the back aisle toward the dock door. The emergency latch was rusted solid, so I grabbed a metal cart and rammed it into the door with everything I had. On the second hit, the latch snapped. The door shot up halfway, cold air flooding inside. I dropped to my stomach and slid under it, scraping my jacket across the concrete. Behind me, the metal door slammed open, and the men shouted something I couldn't make out. I didn't stop running. I cut across the gravel lot, slipped into a drainage ditch, and didn't look back until I reached my car. The engine coughed twice before turning on. When the warehouse finally disappeared in my rearview mirror, my hands were still shaking. The next morning, I reported Market Direct to the police. They said they'd look into it. Days later, the entire storefront vanished from the internet as if it never existed. The warehouse building stood empty whenever I drove past, with a for lease sign taped to the door. Eventually, even that disappeared. I never told my cousin what happened. I bought his console from a legitimate store instead. Every time I see Too Good to Be True online deals now, I feel the same cold sensation I felt in that back room, surrounded by gutted electronics and voices waiting in the dark. I learned that some places hide behind the promise of bargains, but what they really sell is the illusion of safety. And the moment you step far enough inside, you realize the truth. Some doors were never meant to open for you, and some won't let you out. I'd been on the road nearly 6 hours that night, trying to make it to my sister's place before sunrise for our family Thanksgiving. I left late from Oak Ridge, assuming traffic would ease after dark, but the drive stretched out endlessly. The highway looked abandoned except for a few trucks drifting between lanes like sleepwalkers. Around midnight, fatigue started creeping in, so I stopped at a gas station outside Marshfield Bluff. I grabbed an energy drink, filled the tank, and pulled back onto the road, determined to push through the last couple of hours. About 40 minutes later, just as the forest on both sides thickened into a wall of black silhouettes, I spotted a van pulled onto the shoulder. All its lights were off, but the hazard reflectors glimmered faintly. A single figure stood beside it, waving both arms. Normally I mind my own business, but something about being alone in the middle of the woods made the scene impossible to ignore. I slowed down and rolled my window slightly. The man hurried to my door with a forced grin, explaining he'd run out of gas and lost cell service. He said his name was Bradley, spoke politely, and insisted he only needed a ride to the next station a few miles up. His voice had a rehearsed calmness that made me uneasy. Still, it was freezing outside, and I didn't want to leave someone stranded. I unlocked the passenger door. The moment he sat down, the temperature in the car seemed to drop a few degrees. He didn't smell of sweat or fuel or anything you'd expect. There was no scent at all, like he'd come straight out of a vacuum. He thanked me again, then immediately asked where I was heading, how long I'd been driving, whether anyone expected me to arrive at a specific time. The questions were polite on the surface, but too targeted, like he was running through a checklist. We drove maybe a mile before the trees swallowed the last hints of moonlight. My headlights cut through dense fog that hadn't been there earlier. Bradley leaned forward, staring into the woods as if searching for something moving between the branches. When I mentioned the gas station on the map, he corrected me instantly, claiming he knew the area well and that another station was just 5 minutes ahead. His tone had shifted, firmer as if he were guiding the route rather than requesting help. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. At one curve, he abruptly asked me to pull over, saying he recognized a familiar landmark. There was nothing outside except thick forest and gravel. I pretended not to hear him and kept driving. His posture stiffened. After a long silence, he smiled again and apologized for being pushy, then asked if he could borrow my phone to call family waiting nearby. Something inside me screamed no. I lied, saying my battery was nearly dead and I needed it for GPS. He nodded, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. A few minutes later, he casually mentioned that he used to work with roadside assistance crews, that he knew all kinds of stories about people who picked up the wrong stranger. The way he said it, deliberately vague, like an invitation to imagine exactly what he wanted me to imagine. My chest tightened with instinctual warning. I forced a laugh, acted unbothered, and turned up the radio, but he reached forward and lowered the volume with 2 fingers. The atmosphere thickened. That's when I noticed something strange. He wasn't wearing a coat, despite the freezing temperature, just a thin button-up shirt. No shivering, no breath fogging in the air, nothing. My car felt smaller by the second. Suddenly, he asked me to turn onto a dirt road coming up on the right, insisting the gas station was quicker that way. The road sign was blank, no lights, no markers. I told him I preferred to stay on the main highway. His voice dropped lower as he repeated the request, slower this time, like he expected obedience. I refused again. The fake friendliness vanished. He sank back in his seat, shoulders rising and falling with a controlled rhythm. No anger, just calculation. A minute later, he calmly asked me to stop the car altogether, not pull over. Just stop, right there in the middle of the highway. I said no. He exhaled through his nose as if disappointed. The fog outside felt thicker, like something was closing in around the vehicle. My mind raced to every horror story I'd ever heard about hitchhikers. I changed the subject abruptly, asking where he worked before roadside assistance. He hesitated, then said, "I don't remember." It sounded honest in the most terrifying way possible, like he wasn't lying but genuinely had nothing to recall. My hands were freezing, despite the heater blasting. I spotted the glowing sign of a legitimate gas station ahead, a large, well-lit one with multiple cars parked outside. Without warning, I accelerated. Bradley didn't react at first, but when he saw the station growing closer, his posture snapped upright. He insisted I take the next exit instead, claiming the station wasn't safe. I ignored him and pulled straight in, stopping right beside the entrance door where several people were inside grabbing snacks. Bradley stared at me. Not angry, not shocked, just blank. He asked if I could take him somewhere quieter. I told him this was the only place I was willing to stop. He opened the door slowly, stepped out, and leaned down to look at me through the passenger window. He smiled again, that rehearsed expression, but this time something behind his eyes didn't match any human warmth. He said, "You shouldn't pick people up at night. Not everyone is nice." Then he walked away, not toward the station, not toward the road. He walked straight toward the tree line behind the building, disappearing into the dark as if he'd done it 1,000 times. Inside the gas station, I told the clerk what happened. He grew pale and said there had been multiple reports of a man matching that description, stopping cars along the highway for years. Same name, same van, same story. Sometimes the van wasn't even there, just him waving at drivers. Police could never track him. No one even knew where he stayed. Some said he lived in the woods, others said he didn't live anywhere. When I walked back to my car, the fog behind the station shifted like something moving through it. I locked myself inside, turned on every light, and drove the rest of the night without stopping. I made it to my sister's house before dawn, pretending nothing had happened because I didn't want to worry her, but I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I kept replaying the moment he leaned into my window with that unsettling calm, like he was studying which version of me he wanted to deal with. Sometimes, when I drive that same highway, I see flashes of reflective fabric deep between the trees. I don't stop anymore. I don't slow down, and I never pick up strangers, no matter how harmless they look or how cold the night might be. Whatever Bradley was, he didn't need a ride. He needed a reason to stay in the car. And I'm terrified of what would have happened if I had given him one. The moment I stepped out of the bus that morning, I knew something was wrong at Riverbend Plaza. People were already clustering near the main entrance, even though the mall didn't open for another 15 minutes. Thanksgiving weekend always brought crowds, but this felt different, tense, buzzing, almost feverish. I'd only come because my younger brother begged me to pick up a pair of limited-release sneakers he couldn't get online. I figured I'd be in and out. I had no idea the entire building was about to turn into a pressure cooker. By the time I reached the plaza, a sea of bodies blocked every inch of pavement leading to the glass doors. Security guards tried holding the line with retractable barriers that looked flimsy enough to snap if someone breathed too hard. Inside, workers straightened displays with nervous glances toward the windows as if they sensed the storm brewing outside. The crowd wasn't just excited, they were restless, shifting and murmuring among themselves. I squeezed into what I hoped was the least chaotic corner of the mass, trying not to get sandwiched between taller men pushing forward. A woman nearby was live streaming the scene on her phone, narrating how she'd camped out since 4 a.m. Someone behind her yelled that she was blocking the path. Another person shoved her. The energy changed instantly, short fuses flaring throughout the crowd. The barrier trembled. A guard shouted for everyone to step back, but no one listened. When the first glass door finally unlocked, the line buckled like a snapped cable. Everything exploded at once. The crowd surged with the force of a breaking wave, lifting my feet off the ground and dragging me forward whether I wanted to move or not. People screamed, not in fear but in sheer desperation to get inside. I felt my backpack being twisted sideways, my shoulder slammed by someone's elbow. A man to my left lost his balance and disappeared under the herd almost instantly. I tried to brace myself, but the momentum crushed me into the person ahead of me. The air felt stolen, swallowed whole by the roar around us. Then came the worst part. One of the retractable barriers collapsed with a metallic snap. The entire section of crowd behind it lunged forward with nothing to slow them. I felt the ripple of force hit my ribcage like a shockwave. We were all trapped in a human avalanche. By the time I stumbled through the doorway, the mall interior wasn't any calmer. People sprinted in every direction. Bags flew, shoes skidded across the tile, and a few shoppers crashed into pillars or collided with benches. A large advertisement board toppled over, hitting the floor so loudly it made several kids cry. The lights overhead flickered from the sudden vibration of hundreds of feet slamming the ground at once. I spotted the sneaker store on the upper level and made my way toward the escalator, trying to stay close to the wall. But the mob behind me had the same idea. Dozens of people crammed onto the escalator until it groaned under their combined weight. Halfway up, it suddenly jammed, stopping with a violent jolt. The people on it screamed as they collided, tumbling over one another. Those at the bottom kept trying to climb upward, packing themselves in tighter, practically crushing the ones above them. I jumped off the escalator prematurely, landing on the upper floor so hard my knees stung. Security tried to block off the walkway leading toward the shoe store, but they were swallowed instantly by the wave of bodies pushing past. A metal gate guarding another store snapped off its track and slammed against the floor. A nearby kiosk was knocked over entirely, scattering phone cases like confetti. The noise inside the mall transformed from chaotic excitement to full-blown panic. When I reached the entrance of the sneaker store, it was already overflowing. People rammed into each other trying to grab boxes off the shelves. A display table tipped, sending expensive shoes spilling across the floor. A guy in a puffy jacket stared at me with wild eyes before diving onto a pile of sneakers like an animal protecting prey. A woman lost her footing and fell, but before she could stand, the swarm dragged her backward and out of sight. Someone behind me shouted that a kid was trapped. Someone else yelled that someone had fainted. The air was hot, humid, foul with sweat and fear. I couldn't breathe. I shoved my way out of the store and toward the railing, overlooking the lower level. From above, the scene looked even worse. Hundreds of people jammed together near the entrance, more pouring in from the outside. A security guard was waving his arms at the crowd, but it was pointless. The masses pressed forward like they were being funneled into a machine. Then I saw the collapse. Near the middle of the crowd, someone screamed in terror, and the sound cut sharply through the chaos. The tightly packed line began folding inward. People fell like dominoes, sucked into a pit of motionless bodies. Legs kicked helplessly for a few seconds before being buried under boots and shopping bags. I froze as the reality sank in. This wasn't a rush anymore. This was a crush. My instincts screamed to move, so I sprinted toward the closest emergency stairwell. As soon as I pushed through the door, 3 others slammed into it behind me, nearly knocking me down the steps. We didn't exchange a single word, but all of us understood whoever stayed inside that mall was going to get swallowed alive. We barreled down the flights of stairs, our footsteps echoing like frantic drumbeats. When we reached the ground floor exit, a cold gust of air hit my face. Police cars were already blocking the main road, officers yelling at the crowd to clear space. Paramedics rushed past with stretchers. People staggered out of the building with torn clothing, scraped arms, swollen faces. The screams inside the mall carried out into the parking lot like a trapped animal howling in a metal cage. I stumbled across the asphalt toward the far edge of the lot and collapsed against a concrete barrier. My hands shook uncontrollably. A woman next to me sobbed while clutching a shopping bag she didn't even realize she was holding. Sirens wailed from every direction. Above the entrance, the mall lights flickered in a way that looked like the whole building was exhaling. Later, the news reported multiple injuries and at least 1 person in critical condition. The mall management insisted it was an unforeseen accident. Witnesses gave conflicting accounts. The barriers broke, security opened the doors too early, the crowd pushed too hard, no one wanted to take responsibility. After a few days, the story got buried under holiday ads and football scores. The following weekend, I walked past Riverbend Plaza again and saw children taking pictures with holiday decorations outside like nothing had ever happened. The glass doors gleamed, spotless, polished, betraying no sign of the nightmare behind them. But I remembered the way the human wave moved without mercy, the way the bodies folded, the way breath vanished under the press of strangers. Whenever I hear about holiday sales now, all I see is that moment when the crowd collapsed in on itself, when excitement twisted into danger, and I realized how quickly a place built for celebration can turn into a cage that closes from all sides. Back when I was working long shifts at Harborstone Bank, I used to decompress by wandering through Bellevue Commons, the small shopping center across the street. It was mostly quiet on weekdays, soft music playing from storefront speakers, a fountain bubbling lazily in the courtyard, bakery smells drifting through the air. I had a habit of stopping into this upscale boutique called Violet Fern Apparel, not because I bought much, but because the lighting was gentle and the staff usually left me alone. One Thursday evening, the place was almost empty when I walked in, except for a new employee I'd never seen before. She introduced herself as Christine, wearing a lavender sweater and a name tag that looked freshly laminated. She greeted me with a warmth that felt overly attentive for such a small store. She asked my name, where I worked, how long I'd lived in the city. I found her friendliness odd but harmless. She recommended a few sweaters, chatted about seasonal sales, and complimented the ring I wore, little things meant to build rapport. I picked up a scarf near the front counter and she insisted I try it on, tilting her head thoughtfully as if evaluating its color against my skin. When I eventually went to pay, she laughed and said the card reader was acting fussy all week, then asked if she could take my card to the back office where the second machine was located. That stopped me for a second. Every other employee had always brought the alternate reader out to the counter, but Christine said it was being repaired and offered a reassuring smile, adding that she'd be back in less than a minute. Against my better judgment, I handed her my card. She disappeared behind a curtain that separated the main boutique from the storage area. Several minutes passed. I could hear muffled movement, drawers opening, something tapping against a surface. Christine still didn't return. A middle-aged woman browsing jackets looked at me questioningly, probably sensing my discomfort. I cleared my throat and called out toward the back curtain. No response. Another 30 seconds dragged by before Christine emerged with a breezy smile, thanking me for my patience and handing back my card along with the receipt. She explained the delay by saying the machine needed to reboot. Something in her tone felt practiced, almost rehearsed, but I ignored it, grabbed my scarf and left. 2 days later, I noticed a charge on my bank account that didn't belong to me. A large purchase at a home goods store across town. Within hours, 3 more charges appeared. One at an electronics kiosk, wanted a subscription service I'd never heard of, and another for expensive cosmetics. I immediately froze my card, notified the fraud department, and requested all transaction logs. While the charges were reversed, something about the list bothered me. Each location was in a different part of the city. The purchases were made within minutes of each other. It was as if someone had been prepared, waiting with a list of places to hit the moment the card became active. The next week, I walked back into Violet Fern to speak with the manager. The store felt normal, same soft lighting, same relaxing music. The manager, a tall woman with dark hair tied in a bun, said she'd be happy to help and asked which employee I spoke with. When I mentioned Christine, her expression flickered. She furrowed her brow and calmly explained that there was no one by that name employed at the store. I insisted I'd met a new hire. She shook her head and said they hadn't brought on anyone new that entire month. She even pulled out a staff schedule to prove it. No Christine listed anywhere. A cold wave moved through me. I described Christine's appearance, voice, personality, everything I could remember. The manager looked disturbed. She asked what day and time I'd visited. When I told her, she checked the security footage on her tablet. The recording showed me entering the boutique, browsing a table, and choosing a scarf, but the entire section behind the counter was empty. I watched in disbelief as a version of me handed my card to no one. The footage glitched slightly, showing brief distortions that flickered across the screen whenever the area behind the curtain came into view. The manager paused the video, zooming in, shaking her head in confusion. She said they'd been having issues with the cameras for weeks. Sometimes parts of the feed disappeared entirely, usually near the back curtain. She muttered something about calling maintenance again. I left feeling nauseous, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I wondered if the camera had malfunctioned just at the right moment, or if something else was wrong in that store. That night, I received a blocked number call. When I answered, no one spoke, but I heard faint music in the background, the same soft melody Violet Fern played in the evenings. I hung up immediately. 10 minutes later, the phone buzzed again. Same number, same silence, same music. I blocked it and turned off my phone, convincing myself it was just some kind of coincidence. A week later, I walked past the boutique on my lunch break. The store was closed, the windows dark, a handwritten sign taped to the glass reading, "Closed for inventory review." Inside, I could see the sales floor covered in boxes, racks pushed aside. The manager was talking to two men in suits who looked too formal to be retail maintenance. She spotted me and hurried to the door but didn't open it. Instead, she mouthed something, "Come back later," before pulling the curtain shut. I never stepped inside Violet Fern again. They reopened a month later, newly decorated, staff unchanged. But every time I walked past, I felt the same invisible pressure I felt the moment Christine disappeared with my card. Sometimes, when I glanced through the window, I swore I saw a blur of lavender near the back curtain, like someone slipping out of sight the instant I looked. I still don't know who Christine was, or how she accessed my card so quickly, or why the cameras didn't register her at all. Maybe she was part of a skimming ring using clever disguises, slipping in and out before anyone noticed. Maybe she knew how to avoid security systems. Or maybe the store's dark corner held something stranger, something that didn't belong on any employee's schedule. What scares me isn't the money I lost, it's the way she smiled. Warm, practiced, familiar, like she'd done it dozens of times before. And the feeling that if I ever walked through that boutique on the wrong night again, she might be waiting behind that curtain, still wearing that lavender sweater, still looking for someone willing to hand her their card. Back when I moved into my apartment at Maple Shore Residences, I decided to upgrade all my electronics at once. New TV, new router, sound system, the whole thing. I wasn't great with installation, so when a company called Tech Savvy Installers offered a package deal that included setup, wiring, and calibration, I booked it immediately. Their email confirmation said a technician would arrive Saturday between 10 a.m. and noon. They even sent a name, Daniel Arbnide, along with a short, friendly bio and a picture of a clean-cut guy in a blue polo. The instructions said he'd show ID upon arrival. That Saturday morning around 10:15, my buzzer rang. A voice said he was from Tech Savvy and had arrived a little early. I pressed the button to let him in without thinking much about it. A moment later, there was a knock on my door. Standing there was a tall man wearing dark jeans and a charcoal hoodie. No polo, no badge, no toolbox. His smile seemed polite enough, but nothing about him matched the email. I hesitated, and he quickly explained that corporate had updated uniforms and that his ID badge printer was broken. His voice carried a calm confidence that made my doubts feel dramatic. I stepped aside and let him in. He walked straight to the TV boxes stacked in my living room, nodding appreciatively and talking about the new model specs as if he really knew them. He asked where I wanted everything mounted, how I planned the room layout, and whether my router had dual band support. Everything he said sounded convincing. Before opening anything, he requested to see my Wi-Fi account details so he could optimize signal routing. That raised a little red flag, but he said it so naturally that I assumed it was standard. He took pictures of my modem and asked for my provider login. I told him I wasn't comfortable giving that out. He nodded but didn't push it. Instead, he started unpacking cables with quick, precise movements. He seemed professional, too professional, almost like he'd done setups 100 times. He asked if he could check the breaker panel to assess the load capacity. I showed him where it was, and he studied it in silence for a moment. Then he asked if anyone else lived with me. He phrased it casually, like it was about helping determine the network load, but the way he looked around the apartment while asking made my skin tense. I answered vaguely, saying people came and went. He nodded again, expression unreadable. At some point, he walked toward the hallway where my bedroom and office were. I told him the router setup should stay in the living room. He smiled and said he just wanted to check for signal dead zones. Something about the way he drifted toward the darker side of the apartment made my instincts flare. I followed him. He entered my office and scanned the shelves like he was memorizing everything. Then he stopped at my desk and pointed at a drawer, asking if that was where I kept important documents. I froze for a second too long. He noticed. He brushed past me back into the living room and said he needed to retrieve a specialized cable from his van. Before leaving, he asked me to unlock my balcony door so he could verify exterior wiring clearance. I lied and said it was sealed shut due to building policy. He shrugged, but his eyes flicked toward the door in a way that made my stomach twist. When he stepped outside, I closed the door behind him and immediately checked the tech-savvy email again. There, in bold letters, it said, "Our technicians always wear blue polos, carry branded toolkits, and present photo ID before entering." My heart hammered. I scrolled to the picture of Daniel R. The man in my apartment had looked nothing like him. I tried calling the company, but the line kept sending me to voicemail. I typed a message into their support chat. While I waited for a response, I peeked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. No footsteps, no voices. I went to the window overlooking the parking lot. There was no van marked tech-savvy. Instead, an old silver SUV sat idling near the loading zone. The man was inside it talking to someone in the passenger seat, gesturing animatedly, pointing up toward my balcony. That was when the support chat finally responded. The representative said no technician had been dispatched yet, that Daniel was still en route, and that they had no record of any early arrival. I felt the air drain out of my lungs. I locked every door in the apartment, shut the blinds, and dialed 911. While I waited for dispatch to pick up, I heard the building's front door slam loudly downstairs. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairwell, too fast, too purposeful. Whoever it was stopped on my floor. I silenced my phone and backed into the kitchen, grabbing the heaviest thing I could find, a metal pan. The footsteps moved down the hallway, pausing near my unit. Someone tried the handle. It didn't budge, but the faint rattle sent a chill down my spine. After a moment, the footsteps retreated. A door across the hall opened. I heard murmured voices, then silence. The police arrived 15 minutes later, but by then the SUV was gone. They searched the building, questioned the neighbor across the hall. She said 2 men had knocked on her door claiming they were doing smoke detector inspections. They left when she asked for ID. The officers checked the security cameras, but the cameras on the lower floors had been malfunctioning all week. Just static. Convenient. Tech Savvy called back 2 hours later, apologizing profusely and explaining that they had reported several incidents of people impersonating their installers. They insisted their technicians never arrive without notice and never request sensitive account information. They urged me to file a report, which I did, but I got the impression these cases often ended inconclusive. For weeks afterward, I checked the peephole every time I heard footsteps in the hallway. I bought new locks, installed a security system, new blinds, better lighting. Still, I sometimes woke up at night convinced someone was in the living room silent, waiting. Some evenings I sweared I heard someone walking past my door slowly, stopping just long enough to listen before moving on. Months later, a building maintenance worker mentioned something casually. The night of the incident, 2 men matching my description were seen driving slowly through the back alley, stopping near the dumpsters, then circling the building again. He assumed they were lost. I didn't correct him. HO. I never booked another installation service after that. Never let anyone in unless they were visibly verified. Every time I see a blue polo now, my body stiffens before my mind catches up. I think about the way that man drifted through my apartment like he already knew the layout, like he was mapping where everything was, like he was deciding what he would have needed to do if I had been too trusting. I realize now he never intended to install anything, and if he had wanted to leave with just my electronics, he would have never asked if I lived alone. He wasn't interested in my TV at all. He was interested in me. My husband Evan and I had just come back from a chaotic Black Friday run at a big electronics store in North Hill Crossing. We weren't planning to shop that morning, but our old living room TV had been flickering for months, and a huge sale finally pushed us to replace it. We bought a 65-inch smart TV, stuffed it awkwardly into our SUV, and drove home feeling strangely triumphant, like we'd pulled off some impossible mission. It felt like one of those mundane victories you laugh about later over dinner. That afternoon, while I was unpacking groceries, my phone rang with the store's name flashing across the screen. The man on the line sounded calm and professional, saying he needed to verify our delivery address because there'd been a mix-up with someone else's order. Nothing about it seemed odd. We had given our address during checkout, so maybe they needed to reconfirm things. He repeated our street name and zip code perfectly. I confirmed it, hung up, and told Evan, half amused that at least they were being extra careful. The evening drifted by quietly. Evan mounted the old TV on the wall one last time so we could stream something while waiting for the new one to arrive the next day. Around 11:30 p.m. I was dozing off on the couch when our dog Nova suddenly became alert near the back door. She's usually calm at night, but her low growls came one after another, ears tilted sharply forward. Evan muted the TV. We both listened. Outside, tires rolled slowly over the gravel on our side road. Soft, careful, almost deliberate. We lived in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where every unexpected sound stands out. Evan peeked through the curtain. A dark pickup truck was parked across the street. No company logos, no plates visible from that angle. The engine cut off, but the headlights stayed on like 2 pale, unblinking eyes. "Probably someone lost," he muttered, though his voice didn't sound sure. The air carried a kind of heaviness, like the quiet before a storm. Nova wouldn't stop growling, and then we heard it, the faint metallic rattle of the back gate latch, as if someone was testing it gently. Evan motioned for me to turn off the TV. The room fell into hush, and Nova's breathing was the only thing making any sound. The latch jolted again, slower this time, like someone trying not to draw attention. Evan grabbed a flashlight, and I held Nova's collar tightly. As soon as his light passed over the kitchen window, everything outside went still. The gate stopped moving. The beam caught a brief flash of something, maybe fabric or metal, before it vanished beyond the fence. We waited. The quiet felt stretched, unnatural. After a minute or two, Evan cracked the back door open just enough to peek out. The November air swept in, freezing and sharp. The gate stood slightly ajar, gently swaying. I begged him to lock it and come back inside. He did, sliding every bolt into place. We sat together for a while, watching the front window. The truck still idled across the street, lights off now, but clearly visible under the dim glow of the street lamp. I suggested calling the police. Evan said we should wait 10 minutes to see if the truck drove off. Those 10 minutes felt endless. Nova remained alert, listening to everything except us. Then the truck's headlights blinked on again. It rolled forward, slow, deliberate, until it was right in front of our driveway. Evan stood. I grabbed my phone. But before I could unlock it, The hinges of the back gate creaked open. This time, not tentative fully. Our motion sensor light flicked on, flooding the backyard with a cold white glow. For a split second, a tall silhouette stood near the shed, completely still, facing our house as if assessing the layout. The light snapped off, plunging everything into darkness again. I dialed 911 with shaking hands. The dispatcher asked whether the intruder had entered the house. I told her no, but they were close, much too close. Evan retrieved the baseball bat he kept near the door. While I spoke to the dispatcher, footsteps sounded along the gravel path behind our home. Slow, steady, intentional. Something brushed against the shed door with a metallic click. I whispered everything to the dispatcher, and she said officers were already on their way. Nova let out one sharp bark, the kind that cracks the air. The moment she barked, everything outside went silent. Then, a truck door slammed, the engine roared to life, tires screeched, and the vehicle sped down the road until the sound faded completely. We didn't move until flashing red and blue lights appeared at the front window. 2 officers surveyed the backyard. The gate latch had been bent, pulled outward. Large boot prints dotted the mud, circling the shed and cutting across the yard before leading back toward the road. They checked our doorbell camera. The footage only showed the truck arriving, nothing in the backyard where the camera couldn't reach. They told us there'd been similar reports in the last few days, people posing as delivery staff, calling homeowners ahead of time, then showing up after dark. Hearing that made everything sink deeper into my bones. After the officers left, we sat awake until morning, every light on. Nova pressed between us. When the sun finally came up, we rechecked the yard. That's when I noticed something on the shed siding, a small white sticker, a barcode with the name of the electronics store printed on it. The kind of thing they put on display boxes, only we hadn't ordered delivery, and nothing we bought needed to be dropped off. I called the store the next morning. The manager said no one had contacted us, no orders were scheduled, and nobody had permission to confirm addresses outside their system. He also said they no longer used stickers like the one I found. It meant someone had placed it there intentionally. Maybe to mark our house, maybe to test how close they could get. Over the next weeks, we installed cameras along the fence line, changed every lock, and paid attention to every unfamiliar car. Some nights, headlights would slow near our driveway. Other nights, Nova would stand at the back door, alert and rigid, staring at the dark yard without making a sound. The police closed the case as attempted burglary, but something about that night never felt like a simple break-in attempt. The precision of the phone call, the gate, the truck, the figure that stood still in the motion light, the sticker. Maybe they wanted the TV, or maybe they wanted something else entirely. Every Black Friday since then, we stay home and we don't answer unknown numbers ever again. I used to work at Clearview Insurance, a dull corporate job inside Westridge Tower, one of those downtown office buildings with mirrored windows and a private underground parking garage. It wasn't glamorous, but the paycheck kept my apartment and car afloat. Most days I took the elevator straight down to the garage at 6 and drove home half asleep. Nothing ever happened there. Just cold concrete, distant engine noise, the hum of fluorescent lights. It felt predictable, safe in that numb way corporate spaces sometimes are. One Friday evening in late November, I stayed later than usual catching up on paperwork. By the time I finally gathered my things and got into the elevator, the building was nearly empty. The ride down to the garage felt longer than usual, the hum of the elevator echoing through the metal walls. When the doors slid open, I stepped out into the second floor of the parking deck. Most cars were gone. Only a few scattered vehicles sat beneath harsh overhead lights, each casting lonely pools of illumination. I walked toward the stairwell that led down to my car on the first level. That's when I noticed it. A designer tote bag, cream-colored with gold stitching, lay propped neatly against the metal railing at the bottom of the stairs. It didn't look misplaced. It looked arranged, like someone had placed it there intentionally, angled perfectly so it caught your eye as soon as you looked down. The light above it flickered slightly, casting shifting shadows that made it appear almost staged. For a moment I thought someone must have dropped it, maybe a coworker rushing out for the weekend. I headed down the steps, intending to grab it and turn it into building security. Halfway down, a thought hit me hard. No one in my office carried a bag that expensive, and even if they had, why leave it in a stairwell instead of the office or their car? I paused on the landing, listening. The garage was quiet except for the low drone of ventilation fans. I hesitated, then continued down the stairs, keeping some distance from the tote. Up close, the bag looked pristine. No dirt on the leather, no scuffs on the base, too clean to have been sitting on the ground for long. The zipper was closed tightly, and one handle stood stiffly upright. I crouched slightly, trying not to touch it, when a sudden metallic click echoed from the far side of the garage like a door closing or a foot tapping something loose. I straightened immediately, scanning the shadows between cars. Nothing moved, no voices, no footsteps, just that heavy stillness that seems thicker after an unexplained sound. Something in my gut whispered to leave the bag alone. I backed away from it and headed toward my car. The engine beeped when I unlocked it, and as I reached for the handle, another sound came, a soft shuffle behind me. I spun around. The tote bag now leaned at a slightly different angle than before, as if someone had nudged it or adjusted it subtly while I wasn't looking. The shift was small, but enough to raise every instinct in me. Then I noticed something worse. The stairwell door, the one I had walked through minutes earlier, was now open just an inch. I knew for a fact I'd let it close behind me. The heavy metal door always slams shut unless you physically held it. I stood frozen. The garage's fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Cold air drifted in through the open door, rustling a loose piece of paper near the entrance. My pulse thudded in my ears. I backed into my car, got inside, and locked the doors. The moment I started the engine, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. Unknown number. I hesitated before answering. A man's voice, low, steady, said my name. Just my name, nothing else. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I threw the car into reverse. As I backed out, my headlights swept across the stairwell. Behind the door's narrow opening, I saw part of a shape, a dark sleeve or shoulder, someone pressed against the wall, staying out of sight, watching. I didn't wait to confirm. I sped toward the exit ramp. The entire way up, I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting a figure to appear behind me in the darkness. Once outside, I pulled over across the street, shaking. I called building security and told them someone had left a suspicious item in the garage. The officer on duty said he'd check it immediately. I watched from my car as he rode down in the elevator, disappearing into the deck. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then he re-emerged, heading quickly toward the lobby. He didn't look in my direction, but the urgency in his stride said enough. He called me back a few minutes later, sounding concerned. He said the bag was empty when he checked it. No wallet, no keys, no receipt, nothing. Just a clean interior and a faint smell of perfume. But what unsettled him most wasn't the bag. It was that the stairwell door lock had been intentionally jammed with a thin piece of folded plastic wedged into the latch. Whoever was inside the stairwell had made sure they could get out easily or slip back in without making noise. He told me to report anything else unusual and suggested I request an escort to my car for the next few days. That weekend, I couldn't stop thinking about how the bag had been positioned. Too perfect, too deliberate, like bait, or a lure meant to slow someone down long enough for something else. Monday morning when I returned to work, there were security officers posted at every stairwell entrance. They smiled politely but said nothing. When I reached the second floor landing, I noticed a faint scuff on the concrete near the railing where the tote had been, just a smeared dark mark, quickly cleaned but still visible if you looked closely. I took the elevator instead of the stairs. By midweek, security removed the scuff and repainted part of the stairwell. They replaced the metal door with a heavier one and increased night patrols in the garage. But even with the changes, I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had been hiding there that night wasn't looking for a random bag. They were waiting for a person, waiting to see who would pick it up, waiting to see if they would pause long enough. Every time I walk through a parking garage now, my eyes automatically search the stairwell first. Not because I expect to find a bag, but because I fear what might be standing behind the door it's placed next to. Back when I was living alone in Hawthorne Heights apartments, my work shifts at the call center were all over the place. Some mornings, some late nights. On those late shifts, I'd often stop by Value Square, a big box store near the bus line, to grab snacks or small things I needed for the apartment. It wasn't the safest neighborhood, but the store was bright, crowded, and felt like neutral ground. One night after a long shift, I stopped in to buy detergent and a few groceries before heading home. At the self-checkout lanes, a man wearing a pale green vest, supposedly an employee uniform, walked up and asked if I needed help. His name tag read Derek. I'd never seen him before, but Value Square had high turnover, so that wasn't unusual. He was friendly in a soft, almost practiced way, leaning in just enough to be polite, standing just far enough to not seem invasive. He guided me through an error the scanner kept giving me, then complimented my bag and asked if I lived nearby because he thought he'd seen me come in often. The question felt a little personal, but exhaustion made me brush it off. As I finished paying, Derek asked if I needed help carrying anything to my car. I declined instantly. I didn't drive there, and even if I had, I wouldn't have accepted. He nodded, smiling too long before walking away. I didn't think much of it. Just another overly chatty employee trying to look helpful before closing time. I took the bus home and settled into my routine. Shower, small dinner, background TV noise while folding laundry. Nothing unusual. Around 11:45 p.m., I put my phone on the charger and got ready for bed. Then someone knocked on my apartment door. Not a loud knock, a soft, deliberate one. 3 taps. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone, and none of my neighbors ever stopped by that late. I crept toward the peephole. The hallway light flickered, casting a dim haze over everything. Standing directly in front of my door, facing it, was the man from the store, Derek. He had changed clothes. No vest now, just a dark jacket. He wasn't holding any bags or items. He wasn't looking around or calling out. He was simply standing there, staring at my door like he knew I was on the other side. My pulse pounded so hard it felt like the walls were vibrating. He knocked again. Same soft pattern. Not aggressive, just persistent. Like someone knocking on a bathroom door, waiting for permission to enter. I stepped back quietly, willing myself not to make a sound. Maybe he'd mistaken my apartment for someone else's. Maybe he lived on this floor. Maybe. Then he spoke. In a low, calm voice, he said my name. Not miss, not excuse me, not as someone there. He said my name. Perfectly, like he'd rehearsed it. My lungs refused to work. I backed into the living room, grabbed my phone, and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. The dispatcher told me to stay quiet, stay inside, and wait for officers. Meanwhile, Derek kept knocking, lightly, patiently, every 15 seconds or so. Each knock made my stomach twist. The dispatcher asked if I could see him. I whispered yes, keeping my voice barely audible. She told me officers were already on the way. The knocking stopped. I checked the peephole again. Derek wasn't at the door anymore. The hallway was empty until I noticed his shadow stretching across the opposite wall. He was standing beside my door, just out of view of the peephole, listening. I covered my mouth with both hands. Minutes dragged by, each one feeling like an hour. Then the elevator dinged down the hall. Heavy footsteps followed. Derek's shadow shifted, then disappeared completely. 2 officers knocked next, identifying themselves loudly. I let them in. They swept the hallway, the stairwell, and the parking lot. Derek was gone. They took my statement and asked if I'd given him my address at the store. I told them no. It wasn't something anyone would tell a stranger. One officer suggested maybe he'd followed me home from the bus stop. Another said people like that sometimes latch onto someone they see regularly at a store. That explanation didn't make me feel better. The next day, I went back to Value Square to report the incident. The manager looked genuinely confused when I described Derek. She said no one by that name worked there. They didn't even have green vests. Employees wore navy blue. She pulled up their security footage. In the recording, I saw myself scanning items. I saw my cart. I saw customers moving behind me. But I didn't see Derek. There was no one standing next to me, no one reaching for the scanner, no one in a green vest in the entire frame. The manager replayed it twice, then a third time. Still nothing. She checked the system logs. No new employees hired that week, no temp workers, no badge printed for anyone named Derek, ever. I left the store feeling nauseous, as if reality had been rewritten behind my back. That night, I set up a chair beneath the door handle, shoved a dresser against the balcony door, and kept a light on in every room. I didn't sleep. Every small sound, the creak of pipes, the hum of the fridge, the shuffle of leaves outside, felt like a warning. For weeks afterward, each walk home felt dangerous. Sometimes I caught glimpses of someone standing far down the sidewalk, too still to be waiting for a bus. Other times, the elevator would stop on my floor, even though no one called it. I bought a camera for my front door, installed a second lock, switched apartments within the same building. Still, part of me expected to hear those 3 soft taps again. I've stayed away from Value Square ever since, and whenever someone online mentions a strange employee helping them at a store late at night, I want to tell them, check the footage. Make sure they were really there. Because sometimes the person speaking to you isn't an employee, and sometimes they're not someone you should ever look in the eye twice.